Thank you very much. So welcome everyone. We have a really, I think, very interesting program coming up today. So I want to welcome you. We are in our 24th year, in the middle of our fall season. So I hope you have been joining us all along. Otherwise, our speakers are archived in the Chappaqua Library website. So they are all excellent. I can't tell you how hard we work, each of us, on finding you really top speakers on a variety of very timely topics. So a lot of research and work goes into this, and our speakers are really phenomenal, and you will hear shortly from another one. Um, so anyway, we are nonpartisan. The views that are being presented are those of our speakers, but they do make things interesting. So, tune in. Also joining me today is the rest of the team, Amy Friedman, Naomi Marrow, Carolyn Resnick, and Tyler Beebe. So the topic that we have has to do with migration and refugee settlements. So, or issues related to refugees in their home countries. So it's an interesting topic because I think for us in the United States, we look at migration and immigration. We used to think of it as a very positive thing. We are a country of immigrants. We look at our success and our achievements as a result of being open and welcoming. And yet, more recently, here, Europe, and other places, um, my immigration, which is in many cases now unchecked, has been presenting real and perceived threats to countries who are the magnet of those who are seeking new homes. Um, with our news, of course, focused on ICE raids, anti-immigrant policies, we do forget that there's another side to that, and that is who are these people who are coming to the United States? Why are they coming? And then when we send them back, what happens to them? Um, is more pressure being put on the other countries that are the neighboring countries to those who are fleeing? Um, are there, what happens when they go home? Are they being welcomed by their home countries? Do they have any rights and protections? Are they assimilated back to their native country or their refugee countries? So I think for all of us, it presents another side of understanding what is that whole process of people coming to the United States, why they come, and now when we can't absorb them anymore, what happens when we send them back? And then not all of those people are coming to the United States. They're also going to their neighboring countries. So those neighboring countries are also being impacted. So anyway, we have a wonderful speaker who's very experienced, hands on the ground or feet on the ground. Um, and I'm really excited to be welcoming her. So anyway, our format is that Amy Friedman, who is our hostess for the day, and will be introducing our speaker. We'll be giving you a bit about her background before she turns it over to her. Our speaker will speak for about 35 minutes. We will then open to questions, first from our panelists, but we'll be reading the chats. So we will either try to incorporate your questions or just, if they aren't touched yet, then we'll just directly ask the question. So please ask questions. We learn from everybody, and the questions that you ask are the questions that, if they're not asked, others have been thinking about. So please put your questions in the chat at the bottom of the screen. And as you know, our program is recorded. So if you don't, you have to leave, such as Carolyn. Um, for some reason, you can always go back to the archive and finish watching the program and talk us up to others. So anyway, we have great programs, and we want everybody to really benefit from what's happening in our country and outside our country. So with that, Amy, I turn over to you.
Great. Thank you, June. I think you did a really comprehensive job laying the groundwork. So I had read our speaker's work on refugee leadership and regional migration issues in South America. So I was delighted when I reached out, and Stephanie López agreed to join us here this morning. Dr. López holds a PhD in political science and international relations, and she is an expert in international migration, looking at refugees, forced displacement, migration governance, and the rights of migrants and refugees, and migration policies. She is currently a research associate at the Local Engagement Refugee Research Network, and she's joining us today from Bogota, Colombia. So I will pass it over to you. And the title of her talk is Effects of the United States Migration Policy Shifts on Displacement in Latin America. So welcome, Dr. López, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Amy, and thank you to the group for inviting me to this talk. I'm very excited to be sharing some thoughts with you today. I will start. I will give you like an overview of what I will be speaking about today, and hopefully then we can engage in the discussion all together. I will start for the first part, like briefing you if to remind you, although I will not talk about internal migration, like reforms of policies in the last few years since Biden and since we moved to Trump administration. But just to a brief reminder of what are these measures, some of these measures, and how they have affected Latin America. And then I will talk a little bit of what are the key impacts of this for some particular countries in Latin America. I cannot touch on all of them. I will touch on those who I am more an expert on, which is Colombia, Chile, and others. And then also the regional effects of these changing policies. And then I will touch on what June was introducing, which is returnees and all these deportation movements that are happening, which are, by the way, not new. But what are the effects? How are the people being welcomed or not in their countries of origin, etc. So feel free to ask me any questions at the end, and I'll be happy to respond if it's in my range of knowledge. So welcome everybody. I will speak first for the United States migration policies and some changes that had happened recently that have effects on Latin America in general. So, as you know, there have been a lot of changes and rapid changes to border and asylum policy. For instance, the end of Title 42 last year, which large-scale expulsions or deportations and returns, also new enforcement measures earlier this years, the reinstatement of the Remain in Mexico program, also the cancellation of the CPP-1 program, which have all of them reshaped migration routes and protection needs across Latin America. So the result of this is not only a decline in like the mobilities within Latin America and people going to North America, but also there are more people stuck in Mexico and returning to their countries of origin. There are also growing protection gaps. There are more people that are exposed to the crime, to exploitation, and precarious conditions, and also larger burdens on regional asylum and social systems, particularly. So, evidence from a number of organizations, including IOM, UNHCR partners, and other migration research groups, show that these dynamics are already producing new internal displacement and return movements in the midst of also increasing humanitarian needs in transit countries and rising irregular and higher risk journeys. I apologize. I will stop from time to time to clear my throat. So, first, what are the key impacts? So, I'll talk about five main key impacts of these changing policies. So, as you may know, there are fewer arrivals to the United States from people from Latin America, but this implies that there are more people stranded in transit in different countries. So, after the end of Title 42 and these stronger enforcement practices, official encounters and removals rose sharply. Now there are at zero crossings through the southern border of the United States, at times when irregular crossings are completely fell. But this means many asylum seekers and migrants have been left waiting in Mexican border cities or have returned to origin countries rather than reaching the United States, which has produced concentrated humanitarian and protection needs in those places. This pattern has been documented in a region wide monitoring. For instance, the Migration Policy Institute based in Washington is monitoring these movements. The second point is there are protection gaps and exposure to violence for people forced to wait in Mexico, particularly. So, policies requiring asylum seekers to remain in Mexico while their United States asylum cases are proceeded, um, and the disruption of the sheltering platform, CBP1, have increased the vulnerability of migrants to extortion, kidnapping, recruitment by criminal groups, and homelessness. Not to say this is new, but this has increased in the past year. And they have reduced access to legal counsel and services. And obviously, humanitarian actors have repeatedly warned about unsafe waiting conditions for these people. The third effect, as I was saying, is return movements and secondary displacement within Latin America or inside Latin America. So these recent policy shifts have generated return or southbound movements. So, for instance, people who plan to reach the United States but has case cancels or were expelled or lost access to the appointment system have either been returned to their origin countries or are moving back into other Latin American states. So these dynamics creates new pressure on local services and can trigger internal displacement or onward migration to other regional destinations. So you have recent mixed migration reports document that increases in return assistance needs and changing flows in 2024 and 25. So I have looked for this talk, the latest numbers of this what's called the mixed migration review, which reviews regionally what's happening every quarter. So, for instance, according to the IOM, the number of migrants who list Mexico as their final destination has doubled of the last year, from 24% to 46%. Also, IOM reported that around 23,000 Haitians were received in July and 27,000 in August, 98 of them from the Dominican Republic, so they have returned. Another example, the Costa Rican government closed about 55,000 asylum claims as part of a broader effort to cut its backlog of 170,000 cases in half by the end of the year. Also, for instance, as you know, in the border with Panama and Colombia, between January and August, more than 15,000 foreign migrants were detected. My Migration Colombia moving from north to the south. So there's a shift in the patterns of the movements. And also, for the first time in 10 years, Cubans surpass Venezuelans in the number of asylum claims in Brazil. So now Brazil has more than 19,000 applications that were presented by Cubans in the first 6 months of 2025. So that means Cubans are now moving, even Cubans are moving elsewhere now. Um, Regionally, it's important to say that both Honduras, Paraguay, and Ecuador signed safe third country agreements with the United States to take asylum applications, which means that people cannot directly um, ask for asylum when they get to the United States, but they can do it in these third countries that have agreed to accept their applications. So this is in terms of return and secondary displacement movements inside Latin America. A fourth impact that I would like to highlight here is that there are strained regional asylum systems, and obviously this has a toll on host communities. For instance, Mexico, Colombia, Chile, and many other Latin American states have been rapidly rising asylum claims, sorry, and refugee migrant populations in recent years, as I was telling you the example of Brazil. And this United States policy like changes or shifts the burden of immediate reception, registration, and integration onto these countries, many of which already face resources constraints. So international organizations report increases in humanitarian caseloads and protection referrals. This is another point that is not related directly to migration policy shifts, but rather to the United States budget cuts on, well, as you know, terminating USAID. So I would like to talk a little bit about this because this has really affected some countries, particularly the country where I live in, which is Colombia. So as you know, in January 2025, President Trump issued a 90-day stop work order for USAID, and now a few months later, he determined that the agency will no longer oversee development aid. So here in Colombia, the United States provided 59% of the total bilateral aid for development funding. Um, then we have donors like Germany and the European Union. But by March this year, USAID had terminated 82 programs, totaling about $300 million, which represented for us about 78% of funding. So USAID in Colombia had multiple activities addressing the Venezuelan migration, which included programs on migration governance, economic integration, education, and health. So this has impacted both the displaced communities and those communities affected by forced displacement amid decreasing humanitarian and development funding overall. And it has also affected the technical assistance provided by the United States to Colombian institutions such as the Migration Authority, which is Migración Colombia, or the Ministry of Equality, and several municipalities. With almost 3 million displaced Venezuelans living in Colombia and more than 450,000 still in an irregular migratory status, plus several socioeconomic inclusion barriers added to the re-election of Nicolás Maduro in Venezuela in August 2024 and the continuous internal displacement that has been happening in Colombia for many years near the border with Venezuela. The need for funding is absolutely pressing. Although the government of Colombia has asked, for instance, the European Union, who announced 100 million euros allocation, but in compared to what the United States was giving in terms of development aid, that's really um, it simply falls short. So, having said this, I would like to move on to my fifth point, which is there's a growing market for smugglers, which persists and risks and intensify. So restrictive externalization policies and abrupt administrative changes um, tend to push people towards irregular routes and smugglers, and that increases the lethality and cost of journeys and feeds criminal economies across transit countries. So there's we've seen rising like desperation among asylum seekers and concern about greater influence of traffickers and smugglers. And although I was telling you it has decreased in the Panama Colombia border, which reached last year in 2024, it speaks of crossings to the north. There is now a north-south movement um, that where migrants are also prone to be uh, um, trafficked or smuggled by criminal groups. So then I would like to talk about some regional second order effects of this very shortly. So there is first increased urban pressure in Mexican border towns, as you may have heard, and some South American cities in terms of lack of shelter, pressures in the health system and in the schooling system. There is also, as you may know, political friction between the United States and Mexico, and between the United States and Central American states over enforcement tactics and borders. I've known, you probably heard what happened with El Salvador and how people were being deported to El Salvador at one point, although that is apparently no longer the case. Like this enforcement actions are quickly like changing, so we have to really be on the news every day to know what's happening. But that happened a few months ago. And there's also for humanitarians a greater complexity for planning, because um, humanitarian organizations need to shift very quickly from transit assistance to reintegration or return support. So now I will move to the second part, which is I will talk a little bit about what is happening with returnees in Latin America, who they are, why they're returning, what challenges they face, and what are the implications. So, in terms of the scope and the scale, in the case of, for instance, Guatemala, so from January to August this year, there were approximately 31,000 returnees. Last year, for reference, there were in 2024 there were 77,000 returnees. So the numbers are there and they're very similar of what was there last year. And then it's the same for Honduras, which has now received around 24,000 returnees. For El Salvador, I only have the figure for last year, which received around 15,000 returnees. And as I was saying, a recent report documents that approximately 14,000 migrants who were en route north, but instead returned to the south, primarily from Venezuela. I mean, 97% were from Venezuela, and they were heading to Colombia. So this is one example of reverse migration. Regarding the profile of returnees from this same report, the majority of those returning southwards are from the region, so Venezuelans, Colombians, and Ecuadorians mostly. So we have also new profiles such as families, couples, and children. And this one field report notes that they are no longer seeing many single men as on the outward journey, but they're returning with their families. So these returnees include those who failed to reach the United States or other destinations, which also include Canada, those expelled or returned from transit countries or the United States border, and those choosing to go back rather than remain in limbo, which are those that are strained in different countries all along the route, may it be Costa Rica, Mexico, or Panama. So, why are returnees coming back? What are their motivations and triggers? So, many report the inability to enter the United States or the destination country. Also, it's because of the cancellation of the appointment systems and rising barriers, but also the fear of detention and deportation. So the numbers are now unclear, but I think last week I saw in a report that as many as 2 million people have left the United States. Um, I will say voluntarily. Um, because of fears of detention and deportation. Not the 2 million, but this includes these persons. And for instance, in this research study, I'm quoting here, 49 of the respondents said it's impossible to enter the United States, and 46 cited fear or of detention and deportation. Also, some come back to their countries of origin because they have exhausted their resources, incurred in heavy debts, paying smugglers, also face long delays in responses to their asylum applications, or they just simply decided their journey is too risky and is unsustainable. Others also return because the conditions in transit regions or host countries become too precarious. They say they faced violence, exploitation, etc., and they returning home or to a previous residence seems safer to them. In terms of the key challenges faced by returnees, so first we have reintegration and protection obstacles related, for instance, to psychosocial health, because returnees often face trauma and mental health issues. Um, like frustration that they couldn't get to where they wanted to go, shame, anxiety, and that provokes like feelings of failure. Um, the second is economic reintegration, because many return without jobs, they have debt, they have their skills are not recognized, so they cannot find jobs easily, and some even face discrimination or a stigma. So, for example, in Mexico, returns from the United States include many, like what we call, like in migration studies, 1.5 generation migrants who grew up in the United States and are now returning to Mexico, who brought human or social capital, but found many integration obstacles. There's also the obstacle of documentation. Many returnees carry foreign qualifications or work experience, but they don't have them recognized. Also, in terms of health access, a study on mandatory return migration highlights that returnees face worse health outcomes, limited access to care, and exacerbated vulnerabilities. And there's obviously the risk of re-immigration or onward movement. So without proper reintegration, returnees sometimes re-emigrate or many times get stuck in precarious situations. And also, it is key to mention the return mostly happens under very risky conditions, which are not like these return journeys are not always safe or and are not always voluntary. So for migrants who had embarked on northward journeys and then turned back, the return leg may be riskier. They have less resources and they face the same dangers as going north and arrive in very vulnerable conditions. For example, in Colombia, humanitarian organizations report many returnees arriving with physical ailments such as sunburn and muscle pain, mental distress after very arduous returns. So, what are the implications for this and dynamics for the region? So, this I'll make a few points, and then I will invite you to think about some what we foresee for the future, and I'll end there. So, the implications are that these flows of returnees add a lot of complexity to migration governance. They blur the distinctions between migration, return, reintegration, and secondary displacement. So we're seeing like a range of a lot of different displacements in the region. Um, I did not talk about specifically the data of deportations because this is a whole other universe. But just to keep in mind that um these deportations have been happening since past administrations from the United States. It's just that are now more visible, and in some countries it has they have increased. So also, as I was saying, the phenomenon of reverse migration north south is growing, and migration patterns that are assumed mostly south north migration are changing. I did not talk also about how people from Latin America are also again um, going to Europe. Europe has seen an increase of asylum applications from Venezuela, Colombia, and Ecuador mainly. So this is also one point to maybe speak in another meeting or in another chat. And obviously, countries of origin and transit face growing burden of returning reintegration and protection support. But many systems are under resourced and much more since um, USAID shut down, as I was saying. So reintegration support is increasingly recognized as vital for stability and development. For instance, the Inter-American Development Bank and the IOM note that there's a record number of vulnerable migrants returning to their country of origins. So there are some key gaps and areas that need attention. So one is better data. As I was saying, the number of returnees, voluntary or deportees or forced, are often undercounted, and many returns happen irregularly or undocumented. Um, there's also a need to tailor reintegration programs. Many returnees have specific needs. We can think of children, families, the 1.5 generation, trauma, etc. But we have in America, these programs are very generic and underfunded. There's this problem about recognition of skills and diplomas. Um, Also, there's a need of protection during return journeys. So, for those turning back who are still high and less visible than the northward journeys, and linking return and development. So, returnees could be integrated productively, but this requires policy attention and resources. So, now I will conclude with some thoughts on what is there to um, to watch in the near term, let's say. So the still implementation legal challenges around the MPP or the Remain in Mexico program, the monthly CBP removal trends to see whether arrivals fall, shift, or are displaced to other routes, and the regional asylum application and shelter occupancy data to track pressure points around Latin America. So, for you to know, and I always like to acknowledge this, I use information for this presentation from the IOM, the World Migration Report, from the Migration Policy Institute, some from the press, and some from the Mixed Migration Center, which has regional reports on return movements and protection risk, which is quite interesting. So I will end my presentation by saying that this administration in the United States has made several decisions restricting migration that have affected the influx of migrants and refugees heading to North America from South America, and are also impacted the regional level in Central and South America, leading to changing migration patterns that include reverse flows as well as hundreds of stranded persons along the route. This harms the Latin American context, already affected by diminished protection, a lack of long term regularization mechanisms for migrants, and additionally, the militarization of borders, among others. Furthermore, the regional management of migration in Latin America, which encompasses more than 22 mechanisms, has not produced a unified response to these changes. It has been bilaterally, um, and particularly Colombia is at the crossroads of these mobilities and affected by the United States foreign aid cuts in migration management, which requires high level support to counteract the effects of these changing migration policies in the United States and the region. So I'll leave it there. Thank you so much for listening, and I'm open for any questions.
Great. Thank you, Stephanie. So many dynamics to consider. And I really appreciate, we've sort of lumped Latin America together, but I think as you pointed out, there's a huge amount of regional variation. What you're seeing in Guatemala and Colombia and Mexico, and it's not really it's not interchangeable for sure. I have a number of questions, but I think there were some questions in the chat, and I'm always happy to defer to others. So why don't I start with Naomi asked if you would maybe go into a little bit more detail about the internal dynamics and the public reactions in countries where returnees are arriving, right? Because migration, as you said in the beginning, and I think June mentioned also, migration is now a contentious issue everywhere. So for countries that are absorbing large numbers of migrants, either because people can't get to the United States, so they're stopping in Colombia or in Mexico or Costa Rica, or they're absorbing people coming back. How are you seeing that play out on the ground?
So I think there's like two sides to these questions. First, there are returnees like that go back to their home countries, but then there are returnees who are, for instance, Venezuelans who are now stranded in Costa Rica, but they're returning. Are there returnees? So there's a
Right,
little bit of confusion over there.
right,
But
right. Good point. Yeah.
I would say that um, for instance, in Colombia, we have been receiving returnees quite well. I mean, they welcome them. They have like a return program, which is obviously not the best programs, and, and sometimes it's difficult for them to find jobs or even to regularize because they have been living in the United States or other countries for so long that they don't even have their national ID from Colombia, so they have to go into all the paperwork, and their children are usually born in the other country, the United States or Spain or whatever country. So they have difficulties with this. But on the side of like public attitude, which is the question, I think uh, they have been supporters. I think in many countries they are unaware that they are receiving that many returnees.
Hmm.
What happened in Colombia earlier this year is that like there was a, let's say, a discussion between Trump administration and my president,
Hmm.
Petro, because he was sending I don't know how many planes full of deportees, and we were receiving like 3 flights per week or something with people that have been deported from the United States. But it was not new. I mean, we have been receiving these flights for like forever since like for many years, so it was not on the news, but this discussion between them put the issue on the news. So people was very supportive of the president of Colombia at that moment, because obviously you don't want to see your fellow nationals treated badly. So they were like, this cannot happen. So they were very supportive. I don't have examples of other countries, but I think there's a little bit of confusion why, for instance, Panama is receiving deportees from other countries. Like, they are not our nationals. Why are we receiving them? I was talking about these third country agreements, and there's a little bit like people don't understand that much what it's a third, like even for us who are migration experts, it's hard to keep the track of these third country agreements, like who has signed them. Sometimes they have been signed behind doors, so we don't really know why a country is receiving um, persons from other countries that are not theirs. So it's hard to understand, but I think it's more confusion than rather acceptance or being resentful of being angry at them. It's more like people are confused of what's happening.
Well, and am I right? You're making a distinction between Colombians who are coming back, right, after a period in the United States. But I'm wondering also if Colombia has been relatively welcoming. You said there are 3 million Venezuelans in Colombia. Now, the Venezuelans might not, they may have intended to stay in Colombia. It's closer to home. If things improve, it's easier to then go back to family in Venezuela. Um, but that's a really large number. How has the country sort of been coming to terms? Because I suspect that migration has not really slowed down, right? Things in Venezuela are not much better.
Yeah, for sure. Like Colombia, I didn't speak to this, but Colombia has been very open to receive migrants. They have like a big regularization program where I think they reached 2 million Venezuelans who were regularized, and but there's a lot of movements going on. So we have those who wanted to go to the those Venezuelans who wanted to go to the United States, but now they couldn't, so they stay here. Some have returned to Venezuela on their own, like voluntarily on their own. So we have a lot going on. We have some Venezuelans that were living, say, in Chile or in Peru, and because of the conditions in this country, they returned, but they returned to Colombia. They didn't return necessarily to Venezuela. So you have all these like gray lines that you can make a distinction real clear about, is it a returnee or is he re-emigrating to another country? Um, but yes, in the case of Venezuelans, for sure we still have a lot of them coming to Colombia, whether it's from Venezuela, from the now north-south route because they couldn't reach the United States, so they're coming back, or from other countries in South America. So you have like, I would say, 3 or 4 different types. And there are also always like Venezuelans who live for 6 months in Venezuela and then come back and work for 6 months in Colombia to get some money, and then they go back to Venezuela. So we have like this, I don't know, it's like a never-ending circle of migration. Uh, but yeah, we have still, as I was saying, undocumented migration from Venezuela, and maybe those who started the journey to the United States and are coming back, they don't have access to the regularization programs, etc. But it's really like complicated. If I go into details, it's a little bit complicated. But in terms of what legal status they have, but yes, indeed, we have still there are still Venezuelans arriving to Colombia for sure.
And let me ask, it's sort of a related question, and then Tyler, I'll go to you. You had mentioned that Honduras, Paraguay, and Ecuador have signed agreements with the United States where migrants can file applications in those countries for asylum in the US. I mean, since the US has said quite explicitly that the number of asylees, right, is being cut dramatically, are those countries then having to come up with alternatives while people are waiting in the country? I mean, that it just seems like they then need a sort of fallback, because not very many of those people who are applying for asylum in the United States are going to get it and then be able to leave.
That's a very good question, Amy, and that's why I was saying these are very, they have a shadow, like these third country agreements, because we don't really know what the United States committed for, like in terms also financially, like are they gonna keep these people? Are we gonna give? Uh, I don't know if you are aware of that. Like there was this agreement between the European Union and Turkey to receive Syrians, and they gave them money for each Syrian that they
Yes,
received. So
right.
I think it's similar type of agreements,
Uh-huh.
because you are completely right. If the asylum is negative, the response is negative, what are they going to do with all these people in these countries? Integrate them, give them asylum. So it's complicated.
All right, Tyler, why don't we go to you, and then there are some questions in the chat.
Okay, Stephanie, thanks for joining us today. A question about the northern immigration from northern Latin America, whether it be Colombia, Venezuela, Peru, Ecuador, whatever. Is the bulk of that those people who are trying to get to the US, are they still trying to struggle their way through the Darien Gap, or are there other means to get around that and avoid the exploitation and the violence and, the gangs that prey on them?
Yeah, sorry. So we've seen also routes through by boat. So you have routes by boat to um, a Colombian island in San Andres, and I didn't mention this, but if you look at the numbers, not from this administration, but also from past administrations, most of the undocumented persons that arrive in the United States, I arrive by plane. So they arrive in flights. And this might still happen. So for instance, I need a visa for going to the United States, but I just overstay my visa. That's it. So those numbers, I don't have them like updated, but I checked that last year, I remember, and many of them still arrive in flights to Miami, to New York, whatever. So that is something that is not obviously in the news, but it's still happening.
But maybe this is a related question to Tyler's. For people that have paid smugglers, either 6 months ago or a year ago or 2 years ago, and either they never make it to the United States or they made it to the United States but have now been deported. Presumably, they still owe a lot of money to the smugglers. What's happening with people who have incurred this debt but now don't have US dollars to be able to pay down that debt? Is there much investigation of what's happening?
Well, actually, in this moment, no, but I have read from other research that they're forced into labor, and women are forced into sexual labor if they can pay for their debt. And that's like very, and many have been recruited by drug cartels in Mexico, for instance, to work for them. They oblige them to do things, they force them to do things. So this is what I heard, and this is like been going on for some years now. But now there's not, like, I haven't read like recently I haven't heard of if these dynamics have changed because people are in debt with the smugglers. I haven't heard like of any recent research from this, but it will be interesting to look for it.
Yeah. So there's a question in the chat from Stan about how Spain and Portugal are handling migration and refugees. What do you know much about those countries? I was recently in Portugal, and they perceive themselves as being very welcoming, and the sense that Brazilians, have been welcome in Portugal for a long time. But I don't know if that's factual or perceptual.
Yes, for Brazilians, like they have this agreement, but more generally, as I was saying, Spain has received a lot of Venezuelan, Colombian, and Ecuador asylum applications.
I appreciate your powering through. I'm sorry, I feel badly putting you on the spot.
No worries. I got to talk for half an hour and now. So yeah, but yeah, I mean, and it's not just Spain. It's also they're arriving to Germany, to Italy, to other countries.
And the asylum process, people can apply from their home countries without having landed on European territory?
No, they have to apply it once they landed. So either they go on debt or either they have resources to do it.
Okay. Another question in the chat was about what types of talent are we losing? And I assume, Wayne, you mean in the United States, with this hostility to immigration. What are we losing by this?
So this morning I was talking precisely to a German colleague, and she asked the same question. I think there's a lot of high skill migration who's leaving the United States. I don't know if it's in the number that I told you that I heard about these 2 million, obviously. But for them, it's easier to apply to any other jobs in the European Union, for instance. So that is in terms of high skilled migration. I don't know about the numbers of what to say, not I wouldn't say not skilled migration, but for blue collar jobs, etc., which it has certainly been the forced labor has been decreasing, but not just because they leave the country, but they have fear to go to work. So, but really, there's a really shadow around this because we don't know the numbers, we don't know how many people have left, we don't know how many people have dropped their jobs. Like we see uh, the monthly unemployment rates they're still low, but in on the ground we really don't know until we see it. So it's very hard to tell.
Yeah. And Wayne, I've seen in academic circles, universities all over the world are advertising, really making a big push, advertising scholarships and jobs to American students, American academics, scientists. I see ads from Singapore, from China, from all over Europe, saying, come study with us, or we're offering this fellowship, or we're offering this appointment. So I think it is, across the board. June, sorry, go ahead. What were you?
So where do you see all of this going? It doesn't strike me that the US is going to be opening doors to immigration in any near term. Even if we survive Trump, I'm not sure that the gates will open. So it seems as though we need to deal with the whole issues of migration, and I would imagine that it's only going to get worse with climate change, maybe increasing instability around the world. So I'm wondering, how do you see these countries, especially the ones where, that people, Brazil and so on, where immigrants are going, are you seeing that this is going to become an issue in terms of their own stability, and that it becomes an issue, as it has become in the United States, that they're, now being forced not only to take back possibly their own refugees, but now, others who they may need to support for a while.
Yeah, I think the question, I think it was from Naomi, if there was resistance. I haven't seen resistance for now, but it might happen. And it might happen if, and this is also related to what Amy was saying regarding what if their asylum applications are negative? What are they going to do? So I think at the moment the systems are quite strained, also because of termination of USAID and what this implies for Latin America, since it was a heavy supporter for development aid and humanitarian aid. Um, so I think we're like in the midst of getting to know these impacts. Nobody has yet analyzed what the impacts have been of this until now. I mean, I did like 10 like very informal interviews with institutions and members of different institutions, for instance, here in Colombia, and they tell me we don't know what's going to happen, but we as a state, we have to respond. And we have to, I mean, people need health, people need education. So we have to give them that because it's in our constitution. And that is like what happens in most of Latin America. We have very protective constitutions of like basic human rights. So we have to give access to health, education, etc. But I don't know in the medium term or the long term. Like if you ask me to predict what's happening next year, I know the United States for sure is not going to reopen uh, the country to migration, and it might even close it more. But in terms of each Latin American country is going to be different. Brazil has responded very openly. Colombia has responded very openly. Um, but then we have our own structural problems. For instance, Ecuador and Peru have really political conflicts right now. So this is like the first thing in the agenda is not migration. So it's also a matter of what you put first in the agenda and how you deal with it. But I unfortunately I don't have the response to what is going to happen in the. I think each country will handle it as they can, even if they are pro Trump or against Trump. But this is another story.
Yeah, Tyler, it looked like you had a question also.
Yeah, just quickly, how we all know that the asylum processing procedure, if you want to call it that, at the U.S.-Mexican border has been severely tightened. Are any folks actually now pleading asylum? Is there any chance at all that anyone from Latin America or Central America could, in fact, be admitted to the U.S. from what you know, just by pleading asylum? I'm a little perplexed about that. And we gather that there are long waiting periods for those folks who've already applied, but of course, there are tremendous delays involved. Where do those people hang out, so to speak, during that process? Do they have to remain in, camps in northern Mexico or whatever? I just like some clarification if you have that.
Yes, sure, yeah. And they are, that's why I was saying they're stranded in Mexico and in the northern border. So you have several humanitarian organizations and shelters helping them, but it's absolutely strange. So not everyone gets help. Not everyone that's applying to asylum in the United States gets help. So people are just like finding jobs in Mexico while they wait. But as you were saying, the timing is it can be up to 3 years waiting, um, and they remained like in a limbo status in Mexico in the meantime. And that's why some of them have decided to return to their own countries and like drop their applications to asylum. Um, and I think right now what I've heard about pro bono lawyers in the United States is that they're taking a lot more cases, more than asylum cases. They are taking cases to not deport those who are already in the United States. So they are working a lot. I've been called several times to give my um, my concept on why not to deport. For instance, it was the case of two children who were born in the United States, but their mother was Colombian, and so they were to deport their mother. And where do you leave these children? So a lot of pro bono lawyers are taking more cases of to avoid the deportation of some persons because it's like we can't do nothing with the asylum system, and there are going to be less judges that are going to process the cases of asylum. As you know, this was announced, so it's really complicated. But those who are in Mexico, I don't see any optimistic future for them. Actually, not in the next 3 years, I would say.
Yeah, and within Mexico, um, the number of people applying for asylum in Mexico for asylum to stay in Mexico, right? Not applying to the US, applying to the Mexican government, has grown exponentially. And I understand that they used to get very few applications. And so now the Mexican government is really having to ramp up how they process asylum applications for migrants that want to stay in Mexico.
I mean, Mexico, they're doing what they can. But as I was telling you, the number is like, uh, it was, um, yeah, the number of migrants who list Mexico as their final destination has doubled over the last year from 24 to 46%. So some of these 46% is people who are claiming asylum in Mexico. Mm, the Comar, which is the institution in charge of receiving this application, is surpassed by this, but they're doing what they can, and they don't have another means of regularization rather than being accepted as refugees. So it's also very strange in Mexico.
Yeah. How much, if any, are you seeing governments throughout South America, Central America, Mexico, working for a kind of regional response to this? You said you thought you were seeing just mostly bilateral agreements, but it seems to me, particularly for the larger economies, right? For Brazil, for Colombia, for Mexico, for Costa Rica, right? The large destination countries. I wonder if there's a more collaborative way of trying to address this?
Not much. I mean, we have, like I was saying, more than 22 institutions or like regional councils for migration in Latin America. In Central America, we have a few, but it ultimately it's very what international relations we call realpolitik is really like bilateral. It's like I negotiate with the United States, and that's in periods. I'm not interested in what you think. Like, for instance, Colombia should speak to Ecuador, should speak to Panama to see what's happening, what they can do with all this reverse migration, and they're not. And they don't have agreements because Panama first signed an agreement with the United States, so Colombia has no power of negotiation there. So, so there haven't been regional efforts. Uh, I think they signed like some kind of letter. I don't remember in the past month, but it really didn't reach out like what it had to reach out. Some of them, the left wing governments against Trump measures, but we haven't seen a regional response, and I don't think we'll see it because every country is dealing bilaterally with the United States.
All right. Any last questions from Tyler?
Yeah, this doesn't relate directly to immigration or emigration, but I'm just curious as your personal opinion about how we'll call it the disagreement between President Trump and President Petro is going to be resolved.
I don't think it's going to be resolved, but just to say that in Colombia we have elections next year, and I can't predict anything of our elections. I don't know if we'll go right or we'll keep left. In Colombia, people are discontent with Petro. So some analysts say we're going right, and if we go right, we'll retake conversation with the United States because right now the diplomatic relations with the United States and Colombia are really bad, at a bad moment, as you
Yeah.
may know from all the Twitter conversations, which are not
Right.
the best way to deal with these diplomatic issues. But we'll see next year. I mean, hopefully we'll get just to retake the conversation will be good for Colombia in terms of um, the diplomatic relationships we don't want to lose with the United States because we don't want to lose it. Like Colombia is a key geostrategic, geopolitical like partner for the United States, and United States can't lose it.
Right.
My
And of
point of
course,
view.
that's very wrapped up in what's going on with targeting Venezuela. So yeah, 100%. It's a really,
Yeah.
really important part of the world right now. Yeah, Naomi, you're on mute.
Adding to my bad voice, I think you may have answered this. Is there any work at the UN that's being helpful on this or regional internet intercountry activity? Any leadership on any of those stepping up and saying, I see your head going,
Yeah, no, yeah, we haven't had leadership, and that's like I was writing about this in an op-ed recently. We don't have leadership from anyone. We thought that maybe Brazil would be the leader, like since they have Lula, but he doesn't wanna. I think he doesn't wanna go into the fight with Trump. He's been very silent, which is really not what one expected about him. And he's a powerhouse in Latin America. So, and we have Petro, but Petro is like I would say like baby discussions with Trump. It's like they fight over whatever, and then the next day it's gone. So that's not leadership, if that's what I mean. So we haven't seen any leadership from any leader. I think the one that I maybe might look into in the coming months, it's Argentina with Milei, who just passed an immigration law that was very similar to what Trump is doing in the United States. So he copied some of the measures to its immigration law. Like human rights activists are very against this new reform in the migration law in Argentina, but I don't think Argentina wants um, to attract any other countries into their. He just do it by himself. He don't wanna like pull Chile or Brazil into it. He just do it because he wishes to do it and because he wants to be friends with Trump. So, but that's not leadership. He's just copying. So there's not either a group of pro-Trump or a group of against Trump that is really moving the needle right now.
Thank you.
It's interesting. Claudia Sheinbaum in Mexico initially was very outspoken, but has been very quiet recently.
Yeah, I think it's more because more than all the migration things that are happening around in Mexico, is the commercial agreements, is the tariffs, and as you know, other conversations. Just last week, there was this thing about not letting Aeromexico fly to the United States. Um, like they cancel like the airline flights to I don't know how many cities. So they have so much in their agenda
Right.
that is just not migration. That I think
Yeah.
it's maybe a wise decision to stay silent about it, but it's
Yeah.
not wise for the rest of the region.
Right. Well, thank you. Um, you have given us a lot to think about, and I really value your expertise and kind of the view from outside the United States. I think that's really important for all of us to know more about. So please join me in thanking our guests today. And I hope you get over your cold and are feeling 100% as soon as possible.
Thank you, Amy, and everyone on the group for inviting me and for your questions. It was very interesting.
Great.
Thank
And
you.
June, do you want to give a plug for our next program?
I do. So again, Stephanie, thank you very much. I mean, I think it's nice to know what's going on and the thoughts from our sort of southern hemisphere, um, and we appreciate your insights as to what's going on. So thank you. Yes, so join us, please, viewers, Monday, November 17, 2 weeks from today, when we will go to Africa. And Africa's kind of interesting right now, right? It has a lot of materials and competition is very steep with China. And we can't tell whether the US is backing away or what's happening because all of a sudden we're threatening Nigeria. So things are interesting in Africa, and we will be looking forward to our speaker and helping us understand what things are looking like on the ground there. Our speaker is Joshua Mersavi. He is someone who really knows what's going on. He's a senior fellow at the Hudson Institute, where he focuses on great power competition in Africa, African geopolitics, and counterterrorism. He's worked for the Africa the Heritage Foundation, the Atlantic Council, U.S. Army Special Operations Command, Church World Service, which was in Nairobi, Peace Corps, and the U.S. Centers for Disease and Control and Prevention in Zambia. So lots of really interesting insights and background seen from different perspectives through his jobs. So we look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks, and to everyone, a good 2 weeks until we meet again. So thank you again, Stephanie, and look forward to everybody in 2 weeks. Thank you.